We have no obligation to raise these children. You handle them yourself." Evelyn Monroe's voice sliced through the hot summer air like broken glass. The words hung in the silence of the grand white villa's porch. And then, slam! The heavy oak door shut with a finality that seemed to echo across the entire street. Naomi Pike stood frozen, her hand still half extended, as if hoping for the door to reopen. But it didn't. The silence after Evelyn's scream was heavier than the heat pressing down on the cracked sidewalk. At her side, 3 small figures clung desperately to her. Elena, 10 years old, with watchful eyes too old for her age. Isla, 6, whose lips trembled as though trying not to cry. And little Clara, only 4, pressing her tiny face into Naomi's uniform sleeve. For a moment, time itself seemed to pause. A mother, 3 daughters, and 1 slammed door. If you've ever witnessed a family turned away by their own blood, you understand the kind of wound that doesn't just break the heart, it brands the soul. Stay with this story, because what happens after this moment will reveal how far kindness can reach when all other doors are closed. The sun blazed above, merciless. Naomi's military jacket was faded and frayed, the insignia stripped. She had come not for charity but for refuge, a chance at dignity, at belonging, after years of service overseas. Instead, she was met with rejection so sharp it left her daughters shaking. "Elena, hold your sisters," Naomi whispered, her voice brittle but steady. She adjusted the strap of her worn duffel bag and pulled her girls closer. She had nowhere to go. On the opposite curb, leaning against a rusted pickup truck, a tall man watched. His presence was quiet, almost hidden by the shade of the sycamore tree. Hale Whitaker. The townspeople knew him as the janitor at Lincoln High, the quiet single dad who rarely spoke more than a nod of greeting. But in that moment, his eyes, steel blue and marked by memory, fixed on Naomi and her daughters. Hale knew that posture, the rigid shoulders, the quiet attempt to protect children from humiliation. He had seen it in Baghdad, in Fallujah, in places where the strong crumbled under betrayal, and something inside him shifted. As Naomi tried to coax her girls into walking away from the house, Hale's hand brushed the small coin in his pocket, a challenge coin bent almost in half, edges scarred. Hector's coin. His best friend, gone in an ambush, Hale still replayed in sleepless nights. He had promised Hector he would carry that coin as long as he lived. The dented metal burned against his palm now, whispering of a vow left unfinished. Protect those who cannot protect themselves. He could turn away, pretend he hadn't seen. The world wouldn't blame him. But Hale Whitaker knew silence was complicity. Naomi tried to keep her voice calm for her girls. "Elena, sweetheart, let's walk. Mommy will figure this out." Her oldest nodded bravely, wrapping one arm around Isla and another around Clara. But their thin legs trembled. Heat waves shimmered on the pavement. The afternoon stretched wide and cruel. From across the street, Hale stepped forward. "Ma'am," his voice low, steady, carrying the weight of someone who'd spoken through chaos before. Naomi turned sharply, instinctively shielding her daughters behind her. Soldiers never stopped scanning for threats, even after discharge. "I don't mean harm," Hale said, raising his hand slightly. "But you look like you could use some water. There's a diner 2 blocks down." For the first time since the door slammed, Naomi exhaled. Her eyes flickered over the stranger. Rough work boots, a faded shirt, the kind of man who looked weathered, but not unkind. The 3 girls peered out from behind her, their gazes curious. Clara whispered, "Mama, I'm thirsty." Naomi's throat tightened. Pride screamed to refuse, but her daughters' parched faces decided for her. She nodded. "Thank you." The moment Hale extended his hand, Something subtle shifted. To the neighbors watching from curtained windows, it was nothing. A man offering directions. But to Naomi, standing abandoned by her own blood, it was monumental. Someone had chosen not to look away. And to the audience, this was the spark. Rage at Evelyn's cruelty mingled with relief that someone, even a quiet stranger, had seen their pain. The group began walking, slow steps down the blistering pavement. Hale kept a respectful distance, his stride steady, his presence a shield without words. Naomi's mind swirled. Why help us? Why now? She'd learned long ago that offers of kindness often carried debts. But then she noticed the way Hale glanced at her daughters, not with pity, not with judgment, but with recognition, as if he knew what it meant to stand in their shoes. At the diner, Hale pushed the door open and gestured them inside. Cool air met their flushed faces. The waitress, surprised at the sight of the ragged soldier and her 3 daughters, started to ask a question, but Hale's look silenced her. He guided them into a booth, ordered water for the girls, and quietly slid a menu across the table. Naomi sat rigid, still suspicious. "You don't know us. Why would you?" Hale cut her off gently. "Because I've seen too many people turned away, and I promised myself the next time I wouldn't let it happen." Naomi blinked. The words pierced deeper than she expected. She didn't ask more. Not yet. As the girls sipped their water, relief softening their faces, Hale touched the coin in his pocket again. Hector's voice echoed in his memory. "Don't just fight battles, Hale. Fight for people." And so he had begun. Outside the diner window, Evelyn Monroe's white villa gleamed in the distance, indifferent. But inside, around the sticky table of a roadside diner, something unspoken had begun. A fragile alliance between a wounded soldier, her 3 abandoned daughters, and a man carrying a scar shaped like loyalty. The audience knows this is not the end of their suffering. It is only the first step. But they also sense it, the seed of change, planted in the soil of rejection, watered by the smallest act of human decency. The diner meal had been only a beginning. Hours later, twilight stretched across the valley, and Naomi Pike followed Hale Whitaker up the gravel path toward a modest wooden house tucked at the edge of town. Her daughters clung to her hands, their shoes scuffing the dirt as cicadas sang. It was not the villa she had been cast out from. No marble steps, no polished windows. The wooden house was small, weathered, its porch sagging slightly under the weight of years. Yet a single porch light glowed warm against the gathering dark. When Hale pushed the door open, the smell of cedar and old books welcomed them. Inside, the living room was simple. Worn armchairs, shelves lined with second-hand novels, a faded rug. At the far end, a young girl about 14 rose from the couch, lowering her sketchbook. "June," Hale said softly, "we have guests." June Whitaker looked from her father to Naomi, and then to the 3 little girls clutching at their mother's uniform. She blinked once, then smiled, though curiosity and worry flickered in her eyes. "Hi," June said, her voice gentle. "You must be tired. Let me set the table." Dinner was humble. Vegetable stew simmered on the stove, bread warmed in the oven. Naomi tried to protest, tried to insist they didn't need a meal, but the hunger in her daughter's eyes betrayed her. She surrendered, helping June ladle stew into bowls, her hands trembling as if unused to such quiet kindness. At the table, the 4 children sat shoulder to shoulder. Elena held Clara's spoon steady. Isla giggled at something June whispered, and for the first time all day, Naomi's girls ate without fear of what might come next. Naomi herself ate little. Pride sat heavy in her throat, heavier than the stew. Every bite reminded her that she was not the provider tonight, not the protector. And that shamed her more than Evelyn's cruel words ever had. When the dishes were cleared, Naomi slipped into the kitchen under the guise of helping. But when the faucet ran and the clatter of plates masked the sound, her composure cracked. She gripped the counter's edge, shoulders shaking. Silent tears fell into the sink, mixing with the dishwater. She pressed a hand over her mouth to stifle the sob. How had it come to this? A decorated soldier, discarded by her family, rescued by a stranger. Behind her, Hale's footsteps creaked on the wooden floor. She wiped her face quickly, but not quickly enough. "You don't owe me explanations," Hale said quietly. Naomi stiffened. "I don't want pity." "Neither do I," Hale replied. His tone was steady, not prying, not consoling, simply honest. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, the kitchen light etching the lines of wear on his face. Then he added, a phrase so simple it felt like a stone dropped into a still pond. "In this house, kindness doesn't come with a bill." The words lingered, filling the small kitchen with an unexpected weight. Naomi looked at him, startled, not by what he said, but by the certainty with which he believed it. She wanted to argue, to insist that nothing in life was free, yet something in Hale's eyes told her he meant it, every word. Later, after the girls were tucked into borrowed quilts on a makeshift bed in the living room, June lingered with her father on the porch. The night air was thick with summer heat, and fireflies blinked in the tall grass. "Dad," June whispered, arms folded around herself. "They seem nice. But what if people talk? What if you get in trouble for helping them?" Hale glanced at his daughter, the porch light softening the hard planes of his face. "People always talk, June. What matters is what we do when they're watching." June bit her lip, then asked the question she had been holding back. "Why them? Why now?" Hale reached into his pocket, pulling out the bent coin. He rolled it across his knuckles before holding it out for June to see. "Hector gave me this," he said. "Told me it meant you never walk away from someone abandoned. I failed him once. I'm not failing again." June looked at the dented coin, its surface scarred like her father's memory. She placed her small hand over his, closing his fingers around it. "I don't want you to carry everything alone, Dad," she whispered. For the first time that day, Hale smiled. "Then don't let me." Inside, Naomi stirred in restless sleep on the couch, the glow of the porch light slipping through the curtains. Her daughters breathed evenly beside her, unaware of the storm still raging in their mother's chest. But for the audience, the shift was clear. This wasn't only shelter for the night. This was the first spark of something larger. Hale wasn't merely offering a meal or a bed. He was laying the first stone of a path that would upend everything Naomi believed about herself, about trust, about survival. The seed of change had been planted, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet conviction of a man who lived by promises long after the world had forgotten them. And though Naomi did not know it yet, her tears in the kitchen were not the end of her dignity. They were the beginning of her healing. The wooden house stood in silence under the stars, cradling two broken families who, by accident or fate, had collided on the same summer night. Around its worn beams, the air held a promise, fragile, unspoken, but undeniable. A promise that this encounter would not just change their lives, it would change the game. The night pressed heavy over the wooden house, and though Naomi's daughters slept soundly, Hale Whitaker could not. He sat on the porch alone, fingers working the bent coin over and over like a rosary. Fireflies glowed faintly in the distance, but his mind wasn't in the present. It was back in Kandahar. The sand had been whipping like knives when the convoy stalled. Hale and his squad huddled behind a half-buried wall, the sky rattling with gunfire. He remembered Hector crouched beside him, dust caked into every line of his grin. Hector had always laughed too loud, talked too much, and carried a heart big enough to pull men out of hell. "Don't let the storm scare you, Whitaker," Hector had shouted above the noise. "Storms pass. Promises don't." Minutes later, an RPG tore the ground apart. Hale woke with blood in his mouth and ringing in his ears. Hector was half buried, his body shielding another soldier. Hale clawed at the rubble until his hands bled, but it was too late. The coin Hector had always carried, a challenge coin battered from years of deployments, was twisted in the dirt. Hale picked it up, trembling, as Hector's final words whispered in his mind. "You don't walk away. Not when someone needs you." That wound had never closed. Every night, every quiet moment, Hector's voice returned like an echo Hale couldn't silence. And tonight, watching Naomi sleep curled on his couch, the resonance struck harder. He hadn't saved Hector. Maybe, just maybe, he could keep that promise now. Inside, Naomi lay awake, staring at the ceiling beams. The room smelled faintly of cedar and stew, but her mind was far from the present. Slowly, she rose, careful not to wake her daughters, and stepped onto the porch. Hale turned slightly, offering her a seat without words. For a moment, they sat in silence, cicadas buzzing in the trees. Finally, Naomi spoke. "My husband's name was Drew Monroe." Her voice was even, but thin, as if each syllable had to fight its way free. "He was a captain, smart, cautious. He always checked the gear twice before going out." And yet, her hands clenched in her lap. The vest failed. Faulty plates. They told me it was unfortunate, that the company responsible had already replaced the model, so there was no liability. Just bad timing. Her breath shuddered, but her eyes stayed fixed on the darkness beyond the porch. I raised questions. Too many. My father-in-law told me to stop. He said the family had ties to Kincaid Defense, that pressing it would ruin contracts, ruin reputations. So I shut my mouth, until Drew's mother, Evelyn, looked at me like I was a burden, not a widow. And when I wouldn't play the silent part anymore, they shut the door in my face. The words spilled quietly, like water from a cracked jug. Hale listened. He knew the Monroe name. Kincaid Defense supplied half the region's military equipment. Charles Monroe, Drew's father, was as much a businessman as a patriarch. Contracts, power, influence, they bled into every decision. Evelyn, cold and sharp, wasn't simply cruel. She was cornered. To acknowledge Naomi's grief, to validate her accusations, would have been to unravel Charles's empire. Hale saw it now. The cruelty Naomi endured wasn't random malice, but the deliberate act of people defending their own fortress of influence. "Evelyn and Charles," Naomi whispered, bitterness softening into weary clarity. "They don't hate me. Not really. They fear what I represent, the truth that their legacy is built on blood and denial. So they push me out, silence me, and hope the story dies with me." Hale turned the coin in his hand, its dented surface catching the light. "Legacies built on silence don't last," he murmured. Naomi gave him a tired smile. "You sound certain." "Because I've seen what silence costs," Hale answered. For a moment, the night wrapped around them both. Two soldiers carrying different ghosts, yet bound by the same wound. Betrayal by systems they had trusted. Naomi looked at the coin in Hale's hand. "What's that?" "Hector's," he said simply. "He died covering another man. I promised I wouldn't walk away again." Naomi studied him, her eyes glimmering faintly in the porch light. She saw the scar beneath his calm, the loyalty that had cut so deep it still bled years later. "I think Drew would have liked you," she whispered. The words hit Hale harder than he expected. He didn't deserve comparison to a fallen officer, yet the sincerity in her tone made his throat tighten. For the first time, both of them allowed silence to settle. Not as an enemy, but as a fragile truce. Inside, through the thin walls, Elena stirred and murmured in her sleep. Naomi instinctively rose, peeking in on her daughters. Hale followed at a respectful distance, watching as Naomi tucked the quilt around the little girl's shoulders. Her tenderness was unguarded, vulnerable in a way she had tried to hide. Hale's gaze lingered, not on Naomi alone, but on the three girls breathing steadily in the lamplight. For him, the sight collided with memory. Hector's sacrifice, his last breath spent protecting another. And Naomi, watching Hale watching her children, felt something stir, an acknowledgement that their wounds, though carved by different battles, overlapped. Both had been robbed by the same machine of power, profit, and denial. Both had been abandoned when they needed truth most. The audience, witnessing this unspoken connection, felt the collision of two griefs, two vows, two forms of betrayal. And in that collision, a faint hope glimmered, that together they might forge something the world could not silence. The night deepened, but neither Hale nor Naomi returned fully to sleep. The coin rested on the porch rail, glinting like a witness under the moonlight. For Hale, it was Hector's promise. For Naomi, it was the unspoken truth about Drew. Two wounds, once separate, had crossed paths, and though healing was far away, the moment carved its first step, an alliance not born of pity, but of shared scars. In the wooden house at the valley's edge, the shadows of the past had found voice, and the past, long buried by silence, had begun to stir. Morning light filtered weakly through the kitchen window of Hale's cabin. Naomi stood at the counter, her hand still trembling from a restless night. She had risen before the girls, driven by an ache she couldn't name. While tidying the folded laundry stacked on the table, she noticed something metallic wedged between the folds of Drew's old duffel bag, her last tangible piece of him. It was a coin. At first glance, it looked like any other military challenge coin, embossed with insignias and mottos, its edges worn smooth by years of use. But when Naomi held it, she frowned. It felt heavier than it should, almost unnaturally so. She turned it over in her palm, tapping it against the wood. The weight was wrong. Hale entered, hair damp from the well outside, shirt clinging to his shoulders. He noticed her expression and stopped. "You okay?" Naomi hesitated, then extended the coin. This was Drew's, but something's not right. Hale took it, rolling it between his fingers with the instinctive familiarity of a soldier, his brow furrowed. "You're right. It's weighted. Not standard issue." He tried prying gently at the edge with his thumb, but it didn't budge. The air thickened between them. A coin wasn't supposed to carry secrets, but this one did. That afternoon, Hale made a call. Within hours, an old Jeep pulled up the gravel drive. Out stepped Helena Cross, a veteran-turned-lawyer in her early 40s. She carried herself with the authority of someone who had seen both battlefield and courtroom, her cane tapping rhythmically against the ground. "Whitaker," she greeted, voice low and steady. "You wouldn't call unless it mattered." Hale gestured toward Naomi. "This is Naomi Monroe. She found something." Naomi, still guarded, offered the coin. Helena studied it, her sharp eyes narrowing. She set down her leather briefcase, pulled out a slim toolkit, and with practiced precision began examining the object. "Challenge coins get customized sometimes," she murmured, "but this is engineered." She pressed at the rim with a jeweler's tool. A faint click sounded. With delicate force, she twisted. The coin split open, revealing a hollow core. Inside, barely larger than a fingernail, lay a micro SD card. Naomi's breath caught. Drew. He left this? Hale's jaw tightened. Or he carried it because someone wanted it hidden. Helena slid the card into a reader she carried, connecting it to her rugged laptop. For a moment, the screen flickered. Then, grainy video filled the cabin. Rows of soldiers stood in formation, armored vests strapped tight. A voice off camera gave the order. "Live test, level 3 plates." The soldiers braced. A technician fired. The bullet tore through the vest like paper. Gasps filled the footage. A second test, same result. The armor crumpled under minimal firepower. Another file opened, this time an email chain. Words scrolled across the screen, each line a blow. "We cannot delay full rollout. Production deadlines supersede field tests. Marketing expects shipment by Q3. Signed, Victor Kincaid." Naomi's knees weakened. "Victor? The CEO?" Helena nodded grimly. "This isn't just negligence. This is corporate fraud. And your husband, he must have known. That's why he carried this." The weight of the coin now made sense. Drew had risked everything to conceal evidence that could destroy Kincaid Defense. Naomi's hand covered her mouth. He died because of this. Because they sent men out in faulty armor, and when he tried to speak, her voice broke. Hale steadied her with a hand on her shoulder, but his own chest burned with fury. He remembered the twisted plate that hadn't saved Hector. He remembered whispers about contracts rushed to deployment. Now the truth wasn't abstract. It was on the screen, signed and dated. Helena leaned back, her expression dark. "If this leaks, Kincaid falls. But you need to understand. People kill to keep this buried." Naomi's eyes hardened, tears replaced by resolve. "Then let them come. I won't stay silent." For a beat, the cabin was silent except for the hum of the laptop. Hale looked at the coin, now in halves on the table, its secret exposed. A small object, but it carried the weight of a war. What would you do if the smallest object in your hand carried the power to bring down giants? How far would a secret like this coin take you? Stay, because this is only the first door opening, and behind it, the storm is waiting. Elena shuffled sleepily into the room, rubbing her eyes. She asked for water, unaware of the storm swirling inches from her. Naomi fetched a glass, her movements shaky but maternal. Watching her, Hale felt the dual weight, the innocence of 3 girls who deserved safety, and the deadly truth that could take even that away. Helena shut her laptop. "Listen to me. Evidence this explosive doesn't just disappear into the world. You'll need protection, strategy. Allies who won't fold when the Monroes or Kincaid push back. Hale, you're steady, but you're one man. And Naomi," she softened her tone, "you're brave, but they'll paint you as unstable, grieving, vindictive. That's their playbook." Naomi straightened. "Let them. I don't care what they call me. My girls deserve better than silence." Her words landed with the force of a vow, echoing Hale's own promise to Hector. The evening closed in, shadows stretching long across the valley. Outside, cicadas roared, but inside, the coin's hollow weight silenced everything else. The past had spoken, through armor that shattered, through emails signed in arrogance, through the last secret Drew carried to his grave. For Hale, it was confirmation of everything he feared about silence. For Naomi, it was a doorway to truth, too dangerous to ignore. And for the audience, it was the moment the story shifted. From wounds of abandonment to the first sparks of a fight for justice. The coin had cracked open more than a secret. It had cracked open destiny. The video surfaced quietly at first, tucked into the feed of a local cafe's page. Toby Whitman, a part-time barista and amateur photographer, had been walking home the night Evelyn Monroe slammed the door in Naomi's face. His phone had been rolling, almost by accident, capturing every raw second. Evelyn's sharp voice, the 3 girls standing bewildered, Naomi's silence holding back tears, and finally that sound, the thunder of a door shutting them out. Toby uploaded it with a single caption. "Some things should never happen in our town." At first, only a handful of friends watched. But by dawn, shares multiplied. Screens glowed across Laurel Springs, at gas stations, in teachers' lounges, on construction sites during coffee breaks. People leaned closer. Volume turned low. Then exchanged glances heavy with unease. In a town where privacy often eclipsed justice, being caught on camera changed everything. Words that might have been dismissed as rumor were now undeniable proof. Evelyn Monroe's voice was on record, cold as stone. The clip showed Naomi and her daughters alone under the sun, no theatrics, no excuses. On Main Street, whispers rippled. "Did you see that video? 3 little girls. Abandoned. That's Evelyn, isn't it? Charles's wife?" For every hushed defense Evelyn's wealth could buy, there were 2 murmurs of sympathy for Naomi. The scales shifted, not by argument, but by the undeniable impact of a shared witness. At Whitman's Cafe, where Toby brewed lattes and stacked pastries, conversations turned bold. Customers who once nodded politely to the Monroes now clucked their tongues, pity softening their voices whenever Naomi's name was mentioned. One woman said, "You'd think money would mean dignity, but that." She tapped her phone screen, replaying the video. That was cruelty, plain and simple. Men in dusty work boots muttered, "A soldier's widow, left like that. Ain't right." Even those who had always kept distance from Naomi now reconsidered. The image of 3 girls clutching each other on the steps had burned into their conscience. 2 days later, Naomi walked the girls into Holloway's bakery, heads low as if entering hostile ground. It had always been easier to avoid places where people might stare, where whispers followed like shadows. Behind the counter stood Grace Holloway, silver-haired, her apron dusted with flour. She looked up, eyes locking on the children. Instead of the usual polite nod, she reached beneath the glass case and pulled out 3 sugar-dusted buns. "These are for you," Grace said gently, sliding the plate toward the girls. "No charge." Elena hesitated, glancing at her mother. Naomi opened her mouth to refuse, pride tightening her jaw. But Grace held her gaze with a quiet firmness that left no room for protest. "Sometimes," she said softly, "a community shows itself in small ways. Let them take it." Isla and Clara clapped their hands, delighted, while Elena whispered a thank you, cheeks flushed with something between embarrassment and relief. For a moment, the bakery stilled. Other patrons, watching, said nothing, but the silence was not cruel. It was approving, almost reverent. They witnessed the shared humanity of a widow and her children, and the courage of a shopkeeper willing to make kindness public. Back at the cabin, Hale noticed the difference. When he took Naomi into town for supplies, the stares were softer, less judgmental. A farmer at the market tipped his hat. A teacher from the elementary school bent down to compliment Clara's braids. None of it erased the wound of Evelyn's rejection, but it placed a balm over the rawness. Naomi felt it too. Pride still made her spine stiff when whispers trailed behind, but she no longer walked with her eyes fixed on the ground. She carried herself as if daring the town to keep watching, because now they had seen what was done to her. Hale, observing, thought of Hector's old words. "Sometimes, brother, the war is won when the crowd finally looks." He hadn't understood it then, but now, as the town's gaze shifted from judgment to empathy, he saw its truth. On Sunday, the Monroes' church pew sat conspicuously empty. People noticed, but no one condemned. Instead, they lingered longer over Naomi's name in the prayer requests. Children whispered to Elena at school, "We saw the video. We're sorry." And when Hale passed through Main Street with Naomi and the girls in tow, he caught sight of Evelyn in her polished SUV, window half rolled. For once, her expression wasn't triumph, but a tight, anxious mask. She could feel it. the town's gaze turning, sympathy pooling in corners she thought she controlled. It wasn't victory. Not yet. But it was the first spark of hope, a collective sense that perhaps this widow and her children weren't alone anymore. Naomi, clutching Clara's small hand, whispered to herself words only she could hear. Maybe we're not invisible. As dusk fell, Hale watched from the porch as the girls played tag under the fading light, laughter echoing across the yard. Naomi sat nearby, a quiet smile breaking through the weight she carried. The coin's secret still lingered in his pocket, heavy with danger. But for this one evening, the sound of children laughing and a community's subtle shift told him something essential. Even when doors slammed, there were always others that creaked open. In the faceless narration of this story, the camera would pull back from the warm glow of the cabin, the hum of cicadas underscoring the scene. The voice would lean close, almost conspiratorial. When one door closes, sometimes an entire town begins to open its eyes. And once a community sees, truly sees, change is no longer impossible. Stay with us, because the ripple of one act of cruelty is about to crash into a storm no one can stop. The Monroe estate never welcomed silence, but lately it carried an edge sharper than glass. Behind its manicured hedges and white pillars, Evelyn paced like a caged lioness, phone pressed tight to her ear. Across town, whispers had morphed into judgment, and no charitable gala or foundation speech could scrub the image of her slamming the door on Naomi and 3 children. She needed leverage. And leverage, as always, arrived with Victor Kincaid. Victor was not a man who knocked. He appeared, smooth, immaculately tailored, his presence like a shadow cast before sunset. When Evelyn's husband Charles found him waiting in the private study, the temperature seemed to drop. Victor didn't waste time. "The video is gaining traction," he said, sliding a sleek folder across the polished desk. Inside lay screen captures, comments, even a crude meme portraying Evelyn as an ice queen. "This cannot spread unchecked. You understand what's at stake?" Charles rubbed his temple. "It's a small-town scandal. These things fade." Victor's thin smile cut deeper than any reprimand. "They fade when people are bought, silenced, or distracted. Otherwise, they ferment. And fermented anger becomes dangerous." He produced a thick envelope, sealed and heavy, the weight of old money and new sins. "Consider this a tool to keep your house in order." Charles hesitated only briefly before sliding the envelope into his drawer. The rustle of bills echoed louder than Evelyn's silence in the corner. Meanwhile, Hale Whitaker felt the change before he saw it. At the hardware store, 2 men stopped talking when he walked in. At the diner, he caught sight of a stranger buying rounds of coffee for anyone willing to gossip. Victor's money moved like water, seeping into cracks, buying silence, twisting loyalties. One evening, Hale stood outside the cabin, the night air cool against his face. His daughter June played inside with Clara and Ursula, their laughter muffled through the thin walls. Naomi was tucking Elena into bed, her voice carrying the soft steadiness of a lullaby. For a fleeting moment, it almost felt safe. But war veterans like Hale knew the quiet too well, the calm before impact. The headlights arrived without warning, twin beams cutting across the dirt road. A black sedan stopped at the edge of the property, engine humming like a restrained predator. Victor stepped out, his shoes untouched by dust, his smile precise. Hale didn't move until Victor approached the porch. Only then did he straighten, hands tucked into the pockets of his worn jacket. Their eyes met. 2 men shaped by entirely different wars. Victor's voice carried no malice, only smooth persuasion. "Mr. Whitaker, you found yourself in the center of a storm not meant for you. Soldiers like you should know when to disengage." Hale's expression didn't flicker. "Storms don't scare me." Victor studied him, then produced another envelope, identical to the one Charles had accepted. He set it gently on the porch rail, as though it were a gift rather than a bribe. "You can make this easier for yourself. Take the money. Walk away. No shame in protecting your family quietly. You're a father. You understand survival." Hale let the silence hang, the only sound the rustle of leaves in the night breeze. Finally, he stepped closer, his shadow overlapping Victor's polished shoes. "Tyrants always think survival means silence," Hale said, voice low but firm. "But kindness isn't something you sell. It's not currency. It's not yours to price." Victor's smile faltered, just slightly. "Enough." Hale's gaze never broke. "Tuda doesn't have a price." Victor left the envelope behind, its edges flapping slightly in the wind. He turned with a measured grace, retreating to his car as though Hale's words hadn't struck. But once inside the sedan, his jaw tightened, and the mask of composure cracked. This man, this humble single father, had just refused the Kincaid name. Back on the porch, Hale picked up the envelope. He didn't open it. He didn't even glance at what it contained. He walked straight to the fire pit, lit the kindling, and dropped it into the flames. The bills curled, blackened, and disintegrated into ash. From the doorway, Naomi had watched the entire exchange. She stepped outside, arms wrapped around herself. That money, it could have paid bills, fixed the roof, Hale finished, eyes still on the fire. Maybe, but it would have cost something we can't buy back. Naomi's eyes glistened. She said nothing more, but in her silence was respect, a deep acknowledgement that Hale's integrity was not for sale. The next morning, word spread fast. The stranger in the black sedan had been seen by neighbors. Rumors blossomed. Kincaid's man had come to silence Hale, and Hale had burned the bribe. In the cafe, Toby overheard a mechanic say, "That Whitaker's got more backbone than the whole Monroe estate." At the school gates, teachers whispered, "If he's standing up to Kincaid, maybe the town's not powerless." The power shift was small, fragile, but unmistakable. For the first time, Victor's influence met resistance, not through politics or courts, but through the quiet, defiant act of one man refusing to be bought. That night, Hale sat with June on the porch, stars scattered across the sky. She leaned against him, quiet for a while, then finally whispered, "Dad, does it ever scare you, saying no to men like that?" Hale thought of Hector, of the coin still heavy in his pocket, of promises forged in mud and fire. He placed an arm around his daughter's shoulders. Courage isn't about not being scared. It's about choosing what you won't let fear buy. June rested her head against him, and for a rare moment, the weight of the world seemed lighter. Inside, Naomi tucked her daughters into bed, whispering prayers not only of survival, but of gratitude, that someone at last had stood tall when the world told them to bow. In every story of power, there comes a moment when money meets its limit, and sometimes all it takes to tilt the scales is one man who cannot be bought. But if Victor Kincaid thought Hale Whitaker would fold, he hadn't yet seen what true defiance looks like. The morning began almost ordinary. Hale loaded the pickup with lumber scraps and groceries, while Naomi packed snacks for the children. June carried her sketchbook, slipping it into the front seat where she always sat. For a family holding secrets heavy enough to crush marble, the day felt strangely calm. But far from calm, Victor Kincaid had already moved his pieces. In a dim garage across town, two men in dark work jackets crouched beneath Hale's truck. The hiss of oil and the sharp snap of shears echoed as the brake line was severed. They left without a trace, certain gravity would finish what Victor's money had started. Later that afternoon, June bounded out of the cabin with her backpack. She was 14, still caught between childlike innocence and a sharp, blossoming intuition. Something glistened beneath the truck. At first, she thought it was rainwater. Then she knelt closer, fingers brushing a thin, dark streak across the dirt. Oil. Her heartbeat spiked. "Dad," she called, voice trembling. "There's something leaking." Hale wiped his hands on a rag and crouched beside her. He touched the stain, rubbed it between his fingers, then sniffed. His jaw tightened. Not just oil. Brake fluid. For a moment, silence pressed heavy. Hale glanced toward the woods, instincts sparking like flares in the night. Someone had tampered with the truck. "June," he said calmly, though his pulse roared. "Get Naomi and the kids inside. Now." But the plan had already shifted. Naomi needed supplies in town, and Hale couldn't risk drawing suspicion by leaving the truck idle. If Victor wanted him dead, he wouldn't give the man satisfaction so easily. Hale slid behind the wheel, June beside him despite his protest. She crossed her arms stubbornly. "If you go, I go. I'm not letting you face this alone." The ignition growled. The truck rumbled forward. For the first few blocks, everything seemed deceptively normal. Then came the first curve. Hale pressed the brake pedal, and it sank to the floor, limp and useless. The truck lurched. Tires squealed. The world tilted. June screamed. Time fractured into shards. Hale's soldier reflexes detonated. He yanked the emergency brake. Nothing. He downshifted hard, gears grinding like teeth. The truck fishtailed, nearly clipping a mailbox, before surging down the incline toward Main Street. Pedestrians scattered, shouts ringing through the air. Hale's hands moved faster than thought, steering into the skid, pumping the dead pedal out of instinct, searching for friction that no longer existed. "Dad," June's voice cracked. "Hold on," Hale barked, eyes scanning for salvation. Ahead, the road curved toward a red light. Traffic clustered like dominoes waiting to fall. In that split second, the training buried deep within him surged. Convoy ambush drills, evasive maneuvers in deserts where survival depended on reflex, not thought. Hale jerked the wheel left, aiming for the service road sloping toward the river. The truck slammed through a wooden barrier, careening downhill. Dust and splinters exploded around them. June clutched her seatbelt, knuckles white. Hale guided the truck between two stone outcrops, letting friction tear speed from the tires. Finally, with a violent shudder, the truck ground to a halt inches from the water's edge. Smoke hissed from the hood. Silence crashed down. For a heartbeat, neither breathed. Then June burst into tears, throwing herself into Hale's arms. Her sobs shook with terror and relief. "I thought we were going to die," she cried. Hale stroked her hair, chest still pounding like artillery fire. "Not while I'm driving," he whispered hoarsely. She pulled back, eyes shimmering. "No one in this town sees you. They think you're just some handyman. But I knew you were more. I always believed in you, Dad, even when nobody else did." Her words landed harder than the crash. Emotional echo. Validation. The daughter who had seen through his quiet exterior now said it aloud. She trusted his strength when the world refused to. By evening, news of the near tragedy spread like wildfire. Witnesses spoke of Hale's impossible maneuver, how he had turned a death trap into a near miracle. The truck's charred brakes told the rest of the story. Someone had meant for them to die. Naomi, shaken, pressed a trembling hand to her lips as Hale recounted what happened. The girls clung to her skirt, their innocence dimmed by fear. But in their wide eyes, Hale caught something else. Admiration, almost awe. In the diner, patrons whispered, "He saved his girl with no brakes." You don't learn that working with lumber. That's a soldier's reflex. Maybe he's not the quiet fool we thought. The shift deepened. Hale wasn't merely the man who offered kindness in silence. He was the man who could wrestle death and win. That night, back at the cabin, the family gathered by the fire. Naomi reached across, her fingers brushing Hale's. It wasn't romance yet, just gratitude, threaded with respect. You risked everything. Again. Hale stared into the flames. I won't let Victor scare us into hiding. Not me, not you, not those kids. June leaned her head on his shoulder, whispering softly, They don't see you, Dad, but I do. And one day, the whole world will. For a moment, the cabin felt unbreakable. Outside, the forest held its breath. But in the distance, Victor's empire stirred, rattled by the proof that Hale Whitaker was not just a good man. He was a dangerous one to underestimate. Brakes cut, a trap set, and yet survival became revelation. Hale Whitaker was no longer the man in the shadows. He was a soldier reborn, and the fight had only just begun. The storm outside rattled against the cabin's windows as Naomi rummaged through an old canvas duffel that once belonged to Drew. She had put off opening it for years, afraid of the ghosts folded inside. But tonight, after the brake line sabotage and Hale's impossible escape, something pulled her toward it, as if destiny had chosen this moment. Inside were familiar relics, a weathered photo of Drew in uniform, letters yellowed with time, and his polished challenge coins. At the bottom, tucked beneath fatigues, lay a sealed manila envelope. Naomi's fingers trembled as she pried it open. Inside, documents stamped with the insignia of the Department of Defense, pages dense with testimony, charts, and clipped photographs of shredded armor. At the top, in Drew's unmistakable hand, was scrawled, "To be submitted, if I cannot." Naomi's breath caught. It wasn't just memorabilia. It was a federal whistleblower dossier. She turned page after page, horror mounting. Reports detailed how Kincaid Defense knowingly shipped defective armor. Test footage exposed plates shattering under impact. Soldiers left unprotected. Drew had compiled everything. Then came the final page, a form requiring the identity of a federal trustee to carry the complaint forward if the whistleblower were incapacitated. Drew's signature filled the line above, and beneath, the appointed trustee, Naomi froze. Her pulse thundered. Drew had chosen Hale, not his commanding officer, not a fellow officer in rank, but the quiet soldier he trusted most. She whispered the name aloud, stunned. Hale. He left it with you. Her mind slipped back to the last time she saw Drew alive, before deployment. He had spoken to her in hushed tones, half joking, half deadly serious. If anything happens, Naomi, trust Whitaker. He's got a compass that never breaks, even if mine does. Back then, she had brushed it aside, assuming it was just camaraderie. Now she saw the truth. Drew hadn't just respected Hale. He had entrusted him with the weight of justice. In another timeline, Hale himself sat under a different sky, years earlier, in a field tent in the Middle East. Drew had pressed a small pouch into his hand. Not command, not jag. You. If this doesn't reach the top, it dies in darkness. Promise me, Whitaker. And Hale, without hesitation, had sworn, your fight will live, even if it costs me mine. The echo of that vow rippled into the present, colliding with Naomi's discovery like thunder. Naomi clutched the papers against her chest, tears burning her eyes. She thought of the nights she had doubted Hale, the way the town whispered about his silence, how she had mistaken his humility for distance. Yet all along, he had carried Drew's last mission like a hidden flame. When Hale entered the cabin, damp from chopping wood, he paused at the sight of her. The envelope sat open on the table. Naomi's gaze met his, piercing and new. You knew, she said, voice unsteady. Hale didn't feign ignorance. He looked down, weary. I knew parts, enough to keep it safe. But it wasn't my story to tell. Not until you were ready. Naomi stepped closer, trembling. Drew trusted you more than anyone. More than me. Hale's jaw tightened. That's not true. He trusted you to raise his girls. He trusted me to finish what he started. Different battles. Same war. Her tears fell then, not of grief, but of understanding. She realized Hale had been fighting for them long before she recognized it. The children slept in the loft, their soft breathing a fragile harmony. Naomi sat by the fire, dossier spread across her lap. Hale stood at the window, staring into the storm, as if waiting for enemies to emerge from the dark. Naomi finally whispered, "You've carried this alone all these years." Why? Because Drew asked me to. Because Hector died in my arms. Because if I didn't, more names would be etched into stone. His voice cracked but held steady. Somebody had to, and I already had blood on my hands. Naomi studied him, the man of few words, the handyman people dismissed, the soldier who outdrove death, the guardian Drew had chosen. In that moment, the image reframed itself. Hale wasn't just a protector by circumstance. He was a man marked by destiny, appointed by fate, through Drew's trust, and sealed by sacrifice. The fire popped, sending sparks into the air. Naomi reached across the table, her hand covering Hale's. Then we don't carry this alone anymore. Drew's fight is ours now, and we finish it, together. For the first time in years, Hale's eyes softened. The stoic armor cracked, revealing gratitude he couldn't voice. At that moment, Naomi and Hale's trajectories fused, two parallel wounds intersecting into one shared mission. Hale was no longer simply the man who offered shelter. He was the steward of Drew's legacy, the unlikely torchbearer chosen to see justice done. And in the hush of the cabin, with 3 little girls asleep above them, the weight of destiny shifted. In the envelope of a dead soldier lay not only evidence, but inheritance. Naomi discovered the truth. Her husband's trust had already chosen Hale. He was no longer just a friend, or a protector, or even a survivor. He was the man destined to finish the fight, and destiny never forgets its debts. The small-town churchyard was hushed in the late afternoon, the winter light falling pale across the rows of headstones. Naomi had come there to breathe, to steady herself after the avalanche of revelations. She didn't expect Evelyn Monroe waiting beneath the bare oak tree, her coat drawn tight, her eyes red-rimmed as though she hadn't slept. Evelyn stepped forward before Naomi could turn away. "Please, Naomi," she said softly, voice breaking. "I need a word. Just you and me." Naomi's instinct was to walk past. Too many wounds, too many memories of slammed doors and whispers of shame. But Evelyn's desperation, her trembling hands clutching a folded letter, stopped her. With a sigh, Naomi set her jaw. "Say what you came to say." They stood in the brittle grass, wind teasing strands of Evelyn's hair. "I know you hate me," Evelyn began, her words tumbling over themselves. "And maybe I deserve that. I was cruel when you needed kindness. I let Charles harden my heart. But Naomi, this path you're on, if Kincaid falls, we all fall with it." Naomi's brows furrowed. "We?" "My family," Evelyn whispered. "The Monroes, my children, the pension, the trust, the legacy, all tied to Kincaid's stock. Victor's money keeps our name afloat. If it collapses, we're ruined. Not just Charles and me, our kids, their futures. Please, don't take them down with him." Her voice cracked into a sob. "I'm begging you as a mother. Walk away." For a moment, Naomi said nothing. Her gaze drifted to Drew's headstone nearby, weather-worn and quiet. Memories of the night Evelyn closed her door replayed, her children shivering, her dignity in tatters, the slam echoing like final judgment. Slowly, Naomi's lips parted. "You're asking me to ignore the truth, to betray Drew's memory, to pretend these papers don't exist." She shook her head, fury flickering. "I buried my husband because of that company. My girls cried themselves to sleep while you turned us away. And now you stand here talking about your losses?" Evelyn flinched as if struck. "Naomi, it isn't so simple. You don't understand the webs Victor spun. We're trapped. Charles owes him favors, debts. He kept us fed, clothed, safe. If you pull the pin on this grenade, it explodes in all directions. My family. We won't survive it." Naomi's eyes blazed, but her voice came low and sharp, honed by pain. "I have already survived the explosion, Evelyn. I lost everything. My husband, my home, the respect of this town. All I had left was pride. And even that you tried to strip away." She stepped closer, defiance radiating. Her next words cut through the winter air like a blade. "I have already lost everything but dignity, and I will not trade that." Evelyn staggered back, tears spilling. "Don't you see? If you go through with this, Charles will be destroyed, and me with him. We were cruel, yes, but Naomi, he's still my husband. My children still need their father." Naomi swallowed, torn between anger and something more complex. She had wanted Evelyn to feel the sting of justice. Yet now, in the rawness of her confession, she saw not only malice but fear, the trembling desperation of a woman shackled by a powerful man. The wind carried church bells faintly from town. Evelyn hugged herself tighter, rocking slightly as she spoke. "I was wrong to turn you away. I thought siding with Victor meant security. I thought closing that door kept us safe. But it just chained us. Charles, he can't see it. He won't. And she broke off, choking on her own shame. Naomi felt the sting of sympathy flicker, unwanted but undeniable. Evelyn wasn't pure villainy. She was a woman who made cowardly choices, clinging to security while another family bled. The wrong was real, but so was the human frailty behind it. Here stood the woman who once abandoned Naomi, now begging for mercy. Not as an enemy, but as a mother. The story no longer painted villains in black and white. It sketched them in shades of fear, compromise, and consequence. Naomi steadied her breath. She thought of her daughters asleep by the fire, of Hale's quiet vow, of Drew's dossier heavy with truth. She looked Evelyn in the eye and spoke with finality. "You want me to protect your family's fortune, but I have 3 little girls who deserve their father's honor. This isn't about revenge, it's about justice. Drew trusted Hale with his last breath, and I will not betray that trust." Evelyn's shoulders sagged, as if the last thread of hope had been cut. She whispered through tears, "Then you'll destroy us all." Naomi's reply came without hesitation. "No, Evelyn. Victor Kincaid destroyed us all. I'm just refusing to let him keep winning." The silence after was thick, broken only by the caw of a crow overhead. Evelyn sobbed quietly, collapsing onto the cold bench by the oak. She was both pitiable and infuriating, an antagonist shaped not by hatred, but by fear. For the audience, the moment cracked open an unexpected layer of the story. Outrage at Evelyn's cowardice mingled with uneasy recognition. She wasn't monstrous, she was human. And in that humanity, she became more dangerous, because her plea carried the weight of truth, twisted by survival. Naomi turned to leave, her back straight, her footsteps firm. She carried with her not only the evidence against Kincaid, but also the clarity of purpose. No plea, no threat, no bargain could sway her now. The camera lingered on Evelyn, alone under the tree, her tears staining the letter in her lap. She was both a victim and an accomplice, a mirror of what fear could make a person do. Naomi's dignity became her unshakable shield, while Evelyn's fear became her chain. One walked toward destiny, the other remained shackled to compromise. And the town, watching from shadows, would soon be forced to choose which truth to follow. The morning sun spilled through the windows of Helena Cross's modest office, catching the edges of file folders stacked like battle plans across her desk. The former Army JAG officer, now attorney for veterans, moved with deliberate precision, sliding papers into a thick binder. Each page told a story: failure of armor, corporate deceit, signatures of men who gambled with soldiers' lives. And at the heart of it all, Drew Monroe's unfiled federal complaint. Helena adjusted her glasses, tapped the binder shut, and looked at Naomi. This is enough to move the wheel of justice, but it won't be easy. Once we hand this to the inspector, there's no turning back. Naomi glanced at Hale, standing solidly at her side. Her daughters colored quietly at a corner table, innocence shielding them from the storm outside. Naomi whispered, "We're ready. Drew deserves this, and my girls deserve a future unshadowed by lies." That afternoon, a black government sedan rolled into the town square. Out stepped Arturo Vega, a federal inspector with the air of a man who had seen too many cover-ups and carried the weight of deciding which ones would finally crumble. He entered Helena's office without flourish, his dark suit creased, his gaze sharp. Helena greeted him with a firm handshake. "Inspector Vega, thank you for coming. The evidence is all here." She gestured to the binder. Vega opened it, his eyes scanning emails, contracts, and the damning video clip of armor shattering under fire. His brow tightened. "Victor Kincaid's signature," he muttered. "This isn't negligence. This is willful fraud." He looked up at Naomi, recognition flickering in his eyes. "Your husband was one of the casualties?" Naomi nodded, voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "He believed someone would fight for the truth if he couldn't. That someone has to be us now." Word spread quickly. By evening, whispers turned into resolve. Toby, the cafe worker whose video first caught Evelyn slamming the door, now stapled a petition on the community board. "Justice for Naomi, justice for Drew, justice for every soldier who trusted their gear." At first, a few hesitant signatures appeared, then more. Shopkeepers, mechanics, teachers, even the sheriff. Names scrawled in defiance of the silence Victor Kincaid had purchased for years. Grace Holloway, the baker, placed the clipboard on her counter with a tray of cookies beside it. "No charge," she told customers. "Just sign. Because if we don't stand for them, who will?" When one person speaks, others whisper. When many whisper, a town begins to roar. And for the first time, Naomi's family saw not rejection, but solidarity. Naomi held the petition late that night, eyes misting as she read the names. Her daughters leaned over her shoulders, whispering the signatures aloud as if they were prayers. But as Justice's door inched open, corruption tightened its grip. In a quiet corner of the cafe, Toby adjusted the small camera hidden above the register. It wasn't meant for anything more than catching shoplifters, but fate had other plans. That night, Charles Monroe entered the cafe, glancing around nervously. Moments later, Victor Kincaid's assistant slid into the booth across from him, slipping a heavy envelope across the table. Charles's hand hovered, hesitation clear, but then he tucked the envelope into his coat, his face etched with compromise. The camera caught everything. Toby froze when he reviewed the footage. His heart pounded. The man who once turned Naomi away had now accepted Kincaid's bribe. The line between victim and perpetrator blurred, and Toby understood the danger of holding such proof. Still, he copied the file to a thumb drive, whispering, "People need to see this." Back at Helena's office, Vega prepared his report, binder brimming with evidence. He closed it with a decisive snap. "This is enough to launch a federal inquiry. Kincaid will be summoned. And if he doesn't fall, he'll bleed credibility until the market drags him under." Naomi felt her knees weaken, relief mingling with fear. Hale placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, his quiet strength anchoring her. "It's beginning," he murmured. But even as hope sparked, shadows lengthened. Toby's footage burned like a fuse waiting to ignite. Naomi didn't yet know that Charles's betrayal had been immortalized on tape, ready to shatter both the Monroe name and Victor's stranglehold. Justice's door creaked open, but behind it lay more than Naomi imagined. For every truth revealed, another waited in darkness. And in the cafe's hidden camera, the next battle for dignity and redemption had already begun. The municipal hall filled to the rafters. Reporters lined the back wall. Townspeople packed benches. At the front table, Naomi sat between Helena Cross and Hale, fingers interlaced to still the tremor. The panel of state officials took their seats beneath an eagle seal. Victor Kincaid entered like a weather front. Immaculate suit, fixed smile, expensive gravity. His counsel followed, briefcase gleaming. The room tightened around money. The chairwoman opened. "This hearing concerns alleged defects in Kincaid defense armor and potential obstruction. Mr. Kincaid, your statement." Victor's smile sharpened. "We categorically deny wrongdoing. Our products meet or exceed standards. Any failures are anomalies taken out of context. I respect grief, but grief is not proof." A murmur moved through the benches. Helena slid a binder forward with quiet finality. "We brought proof," she whispered to Naomi. Victor's attorney rose. "For the record, Ms. Naomi Monroe is a grieving widow with a financial stake in Qui Tom recovery. Her testimony is unstable. Her material suspect." The words were needles. Toby stared hard at the floor. Grace Holloway folded her hands to keep them from shaking. Helena stood. "Madam Chair, we will introduce primary source emails bearing Mr. Kincaid's sign-off, high-speed footage of plate failure, and a chain of custody for a storage device recovered from Captain Drew Monroe's effects. We will also call the trustee designated by the decedent." "Proceed," the chairwoman said. The screen flickered. In the test bay, a rifle cracked. The plate collapsed like papier-mâché. A second round punched through as easily. Gasps rippled. Then came the emails, calm as ledgers, ruthless as orders. "Replace test plates before DOD visit." Initialed VK objections, foundation, context, rose and fell. Images outran argument. Naomi took the stand. Helena's questions were threads. Naomi followed them carefully. The opposing counsel tried to fray them. "You're angry at your in-laws, yes? You stand to gain financially." Naomi's voice held. "I seek safety for soldiers who trust what they wear, and the truth my husband died carrying." The lawyer smirked. "Or the truth you wish existed." Naomi blinked once, small in the witness chair. A single life weighed against a machine. Hale stood. He didn't clear his throat or glance at notes. He simply rose, and the room adjusted. The chairwoman nodded. "Mr. Whitaker, you're the trustee?" "Yes, ma'am." He set a sealed letter on the lectern, paper creased soft by time. "This is Captain Drew Monroe's letter, appointing me to bring his evidence if he could not." He unfolded it. The paper crackled. His voice stayed low, carrying anyway. "If I fall, let Whitaker carry the truth home. He knows the cost of silence. He won't sell what matters." Silence gathered like a standing ovation no one dared begin. Naomi's eyes lifted, shining. Helena exhaled through her nose, steady. Victor's counsel sprang. "Hearsay." "Goes to intent and chain of custody," the chairwoman said. "Overruled." Hale placed 2 metal crescents on the wood. The split challenge coin caught the light. This concealed the storage card you saw. It was hidden because truth had predators. He looked to the panel, then to Naomi. He asked me to bring it home. Something shifted. An interior hinge. The click when a story finds its spine. A veteran with a cane wiped his eyes. Toby's camera slipped and recorded the blur of his sleeve. Victor's counsel tried again. Mr. Whitaker, you house Ms. Monroe and her children. Isn't your testimony compromised? Hale didn't blink. I housed them after a door shut in their faces. I'd house any soldier's family. That isn't bias. That's conscience. A wash of assent moved across the benches. The gavel tapped once. Order, the chairwoman said, and nodded to Helena. Helena stepped forward. One supplemental exhibit. She gestured to Toby. His hands shook as he delivered a small drive. The screen showed the cafe. Charles Monroe slid into a booth. An aide for Kincaid set an envelope on the table. Charles hesitated, then tucked it into his coat. The room breathed out all at once. Not just corporate fraud, local complicity, captured without commentary. Evelyn covered her mouth. Color drained from Charles. The chairwoman leaned in. Mr. Kincaid, do you still claim there was no effort to influence potential witnesses? Victor's smile thinned. I claim you have innuendo, not certainty. Helena's voice was quiet, edged. We don't need innuendo. We have eyes. The panel conferred in low voices. Papers slid, pens moved. At last the chairwoman spoke. This panel will issue interim orders, preservation of evidence, protection for complainants, and referral to the Attorney General for criminal review. The gavel fell. Conversations sprang up like birds flushed from cover. People stood slowly, as if the room had changed gravity. Naomi didn't rise. Her hands covered her mouth. Tears were not private now. They belonged to the air. Hale set the coin halves in her palm. Drew made me a bridge, he said softly. You're the reason it reaches anywhere. She closed her fingers over the metal, nodding through tears. In the benches, strangers cried without shame. Grace bowed her head. The veteran raised his cane a few inches. Outside, winter light softened along the courthouse steps. Traffic and voices ran on, but something else threaded through it. The breath people take when a weight lifts just enough to admit hope. For the first time since the knock on her door, Naomi felt ground under her feet that did not tilt. The fight wasn't finished. The map ahead was jagged. But purpose had been named aloud, and names have a way of holding. Hale, who never courted a spotlight, found it resting on him not as praise but as assignment. He accepted it like a man accepts a stretcher, because someone has to carry it. The hearing had not ended the war. It drew the lines where everyone could see them. And once a town truly sees, it does not easily forget. Snow flurried across the courthouse steps as the crowd spilled outside, carrying the electricity of the hearing in their voices. Naomi stood near the railing with Hale and Helena, the split coin warm in her glove, the metal halves pressing like a pulse. Reporters hovered, but the town held a respectful ring around them, as if a line had been drawn and decency posted guard. From the doorway, Evelyn Monroe emerged, her coat unbuttoned, her composure finally unraveling. She approached Naomi with slow, deliberate steps, like a woman stepping through ice. Please, she said, voice thin. Not for me. For my children. Naomi's expression did not harden or soften. It simply held. I know why you're afraid, she replied quietly. You built your safety on a promise that never belonged to you. Evelyn's eyes shone raw. I told myself I was protecting our name, she whispered. I let Victor into our house and into our decisions. I let Charles persuade me that money could outrun consequences. Her hands trembled. I was wrong. I was cruel. I closed the door on you because I was terrified of the door opening on us." Naomi answered evenly, the steadiness of someone who had already stood at the abyss and chosen the solid ground of truth. "I kept my dignity," she said. "That is the one thing no one gets to repossess." A brittle cough sounded behind them. Charles Monroe pushed through the ring of spectators, his jaw tight, his eyes ringed with a sleepless bruise. He glanced at Evelyn, then at Naomi, then at the cameras he could no longer avoid. "Enough," he snapped. "You want a villain? Fine. I took the envelope. I took it because Victor said our house would go under if I didn't." He swallowed, rage and shame wrestling in his throat. "I told myself it was a bridge loan, a harmless cushion. But it was a gag, and I wore it." Gasps cracked through the crowd. Toby steadied his phone without thinking. The town's jury was already recording. Helena stepped closer, voice measured. "Mr. Monroe, for the record, did anyone instruct you to influence testimony or obstruct?" "Victor did," he replied hoarsely. "Or his man. Same difference." Evelyn reached for his sleeve, pleading. "Charles, don't—" He pulled away. "I let a coward make a liar out of me. That's on me." The statement landed with the dull thunder of a gavel. A reversal had occurred, not by verdict, but by confession. People who had once whispered now nodded openly. The moral map redrew itself under their feet. Naomi did not gloat. She lifted her chin, meeting Evelyn's shaken gaze. "I'm not here to ruin you," she said. "I'm here to stop the harm." Evelyn's lips trembled. "I didn't know how to carry fear without passing it on." Naomi answered, softer now. "Then learn with us. Tell the truth. Stand up when Victor calls." Hale stood at Naomi's shoulder, a quiet pillar. "Nobody has to be perfect," he said. "They only have to stop the lie." The crowd stirred with a feeling that wasn't cruelty and wasn't pity. It was relief. The relief that comes when a town's story turns toward daylight. Grace Holloway began clapping first, tentative, then firm. Others followed, not celebrating downfall, but the end of pretense. Toby lifted his phone higher, live stream trembling with hearts and comments. "He owned it," someone typed. "Now let Kincaid face the same light." Arturo Vega, watching from the steps, made a brief note and pocketed his pen with a look that suggested momentum had changed hands. Charles faced Naomi, shoulders sagging. "I can testify," he said. "I can hand over the emails, the burner numbers, the schedules. I should have done it sooner." Evelyn closed her eyes, then looked at Naomi with something like surrender. "I will bake for your girls," she murmured, almost to herself. "I can't undo what I did, but I can feed what I starved." Naomi nodded once. "Start by telling the truth under oath." Helena's voice carried. "Mr. Vega, please note the voluntary admission." The moral wheel had turned, not by force, not by spectacle, but by the simple gravity of conscience made public. People felt taller as they drifted from the steps, as if a weight had lifted from their spines. Naomi exhaled, the breath leaving her like a decade of winter. She looked at Evelyn, then at Charles, and finally at Hale. "We move forward," she said. "No more closed doors." Hale touched the coin halves in Naomi's pocket, then lifted his gaze to the horizon where the clouds were breaking. The villains spoke for themselves, and the town heard. Mercy did not erase accountability. It made room for it to land. Applause rolled out again, not raucous, but sure, like a tide returning to shore. It wasn't vengeance, it was relief. The deep, grateful kind that lets people finally breathe. In living rooms across town, viewers of Toby's stream typed the same sentence again and again. "This is right." Naomi clasped Hale's hand, and for once, he didn't retreat from notice. He let the eyes land and pass. Justice had found traction. Consequences had a voice. And somewhere behind the crowd, Victor's driver watched, already dialing. The fight was moving, but the ground beneath Naomi's feet no longer felt like ice. At last, the courthouse was packed to the walls, the kind of silence that hummed with breath held in unison. Naomi sat beside Hale, her hands folded tightly, the split coin resting in her purse, like a talisman of both pain and courage. Cameras lined the back, journalists scribbled furiously, and the community filled the benches, some standing along the edges, unwilling to miss history being written. Judge Daniels adjusted his glasses and scanned the chamber. His voice was steady, deliberate. In the matter of Monroe versus Kincaid Armor Systems, the court has reviewed the evidence, the testimony, and the voluntary admissions placed on record. He paused, letting the anticipation bite deeper. Kincaid Armor Systems is found liable for deliberate concealment of defective armor, resulting in wrongful deaths of U.S. service members, including Officer Drew Monroe and Sergeant Hector Valles. The court orders Kincaid Armor Systems to pay $500 million in penalties, to be distributed through federal channels. A ripple surged through the room, gasps, shouts, even sobs. Victor Kincaid's jaw clenched, his lawyers whispering with frantic urgency, but the judgment was final, stamped by the gavel. For Naomi, it was like hearing the war drums of grief finally answered with thunder from heaven. For Hale, it was Hector's voice being honored after years of silence. The judge continued, voice cutting through the swell. Per statutory provisions, whistleblowers and plaintiffs who bore personal risk to bring evidence forth are entitled to compensation. Naomi Monroe and Hale Callahan will receive $100 million. The room broke again, this time with incredulous murmurs. Hale glanced sideways at Naomi, disbelief etched across his weathered face. She blinked, as if she hadn't heard correctly, then tightened her grip on the edge of the bench. Money had never been the aim, and yet here it was, a staggering sum resting at their feet like a crown they never sought. Reporters leaned forward, cameras clicked. Everyone expected shock, celebration, perhaps even triumph. Instead, Naomi stood slowly, her posture quiet, but unyielding. Hale rose beside her, taller now, not hiding in the shadow of anonymity, but carrying the air of a man who had carried battles too heavy to describe. Naomi's voice rang clear, softer than the judge's but piercing with truth. We accept this judgment, but let it be known, we will not keep a cent for ourselves. Gasps darted across the chamber. She continued, her tone steady as stone. $100 million will build homes for veterans left behind, men and women who gave everything and came back with nothing. Drew would not want comfort for me. He would want dignity for them. Hale stepped forward, his eyes fierce, voice gravel-edged with conviction. I buried too many brothers who were treated as disposable once their uniforms came off. That ends here. We will use this money to carve something permanent. Houses, safe roofs, places where no soldier ever feels abandoned again. The chamber erupted. Applause, cheers, tears. Grace Holloway lifted her hands, clapping until her palms turned red. Toby, Liv streaming with shaking hands, muttered into his phone. They're giving it all away. Every last dollar. For veterans. Viewers online flooded the feed with hearts, flags, prayers, and stunned disbelief. Naomi reached into her purse and drew out the broken coin. She held it high, the two halves catching the light. This coin was meant to hide silence. Today, it carries truth. Let it also carry a promise. Every house built will bear the names of those who were failed, and those who stood up when it mattered. Judge Daniels, who rarely betrayed emotion, leaned forward with something like respect in his eyes. This court acknowledges not only the judgment, but the intent voiced here. May your example echo beyond this room. Victor Kincaid slumped in his chair, cornered not by force of law alone, but by the spectacle of moral authority. His empire, once untouchable, had been shrunk to rubble by the very people he dismissed as powerless. The power shift was visible, undeniable. The invisible had become the ones dictating the future. Hale took Naomi's hand. For once, neither of them flinched from the cameras. They didn't hide, didn't look away. They stood at the center, not as survivors clinging to scraps, but as leaders opening a new path. Children's voices echoed from the back, June, Bella, and Kate, clapping with wide, radiant smiles. June called out, "That's my dad." Her words carried farther than any reporter's notes, farther than any gavel strike. The audience surged to their feet, a standing ovation not for victory in court alone, but for the transformation of grief into creation, of injustice into legacy. The applause thundered like a wave crashing through the chamber. Even hardened officials found themselves blinking back tears. Naomi raised her free hand, quieting the crowd just enough. "This is not about us," she said. "It is about all who never came home. It is about children who deserve to see their parents honored, not forgotten. And it is about proving that dignity, once claimed, cannot be stolen again." Helena Cross wiped her eyes discreetly, then whispered to Arturo Vega, "This is how history shifts, not by verdicts alone, but by what people choose to do with them." Vega nodded solemnly, pen still in his pocket, as though no paper could contain the moment. Outside, bells from the church down the street began to ring, as if Providence itself had chosen to mark the hour. The people streamed into the cold with warmth in their chests, spreading word that justice had not only spoken, but built something tangible. Hale and Naomi walked together through the doors, no longer just plaintiff and witness, no longer widow and soldier. They walked as architects of a future that would carry others. The cameras followed, the town followed, and behind them, Victor Kincaid sat in the ruins of his power. From silence came confession, from pain came promise, and from the coin once meant to bury the truth came a house where every veteran will find shelter. The invisible had become the builders of tomorrow. The cheers outside swelled louder, sealing the moment not with ink, but with human hearts. The verdict turned into blueprints. 1 week later, the abandoned railside warehouse filled with people. Naomi stood at the threshold with Hale and June. By the door, sealed in clear resin like a compass rose, gleamed the split challenge coin. Above it, a hand-painted banner read, "Home Front Haven." Hammers became a heartbeat. Toby climbed a ladder with his camera and framed hands, not faces. Gloves passing planks. A veteran coaching a teen with a drill. Grace Holloway arriving in an apron balancing soup. Elena measured twice, marked once, pencil smudging her cheek. Isla rolled paint with sleeves pushed high, squealing when a fleck dotted her nose. Clara sat on a drop cloth sorting nails. When she looked up, Naomi nodded. The choreography inverted the villa memory. Then, heat, glare, a door slamming. Now, pallets arriving, doors wedged open, a breeze carrying bread and fresh-cut pine. The town learned a new greeting. "Need a hand?" Evelyn Monroe tied a plain blue apron and reported to the kitchen. She burned the first batch, laughed, recalibrated, and by noon the room smelled like a bakery inside a lumberyard. When Elena drifted close, Evelyn set a roll on a napkin, waited. Elena split it and offered half back. They ate in a silence that said more than apologies. Charles showed up at the woodshop in a borrowed flannel, his watch replaced by a pencil behind his ear. Hale taught him to read grain, to follow the wood's quiet logic. The first chair he built wobbled. The second didn't. He set it at a long table and tightened one last screw. Victor Kincaid arrived in gray work clothes under court order. Community service pending sentencing. No cameras were allowed. That was policy here. He shouldered boards from flatbed to door, jaw set, breath loud. No one jeered. Accountability at Homefront Haven sounded like work, not spectacle. Once, he passed Charles. A clamp extended. A clamp accepted. Spaces changed by inches. Offices knocked down to make a training room. A corridor turned resource library stocked with Helena Cross's guides. An alcove became a play corner where Clara shelved picture books. June sketched a mural on the west wall. Open doors leading toward sunrise. The girls filled the sky with imperfect stars. Emotional echo threaded the images. The edit cut from Naomi under blazing sun to Naomi now, sleeves rolled, passing Hale a thermos while Isla tapes trim. It cut from Evelyn's marble stare to her, dusted with flour, coaxing dough to rise. It cut from Charles's tightened jaw to his small smile, as a young corporal settled into the chair and said, "Good." There were setbacks, a short shipment, a leak after rain, a sprained wrist. Each problem met 2 pairs of hands, then 4. When a beam refused to seat, Hale said, "Let it rest. Ask again." The wood obeyed patience. Midweek, a sign shop donated a plaque. June steadied it, while Hale drilled anchors above the intake desk. "This house builds houses." Arturo Vega posted a bulletin of hotlines. Grace taught Evelyn to braid challah. Evelyn taught Isla to crack eggs with one confident tap. Toby revived his pay-it-forward cookie tray. Clara guarded it like a sentry. Saturday became a work blitz. Pickup trucks lined the gravel. The shop class arrived with tool belts. A Marine in a wheelchair showed Elena how to clamp a miter cut. "Let the tool do the work," he said. She did, then grinned when the angle kissed flush. By afternoon, the first dorm wing breathed like a real place. 10 small rooms with clean sheets, reading lamps, and shadow boxes for medals. Naomi traced a windowsill, remembering nights when sleep was a ration. She placed Drew's photograph in the office beside the preserved coin. Not a shrine, but a compass. "We didn't keep the money," she told the girls, "but we kept the promise." Victor hauled another load and stopped, chest heaving. He glanced toward the kitchen where Evelyn moved with unhurried purpose. He looked away and shouldered more boards. The work made no speeches. It just kept requiring him. Grace rang a bell. "Water break!" The room stilled. She carried a basket down the line, pressing a cookie into each dusty palm. When she reached Naomi, she offered 2. Naomi took one, then crossed to Victor and handed him the second. He hesitated, accepted, and returned to the stack. Sunlight slanted through new panes and turned sawdust to confetti. June stood on a ladder finishing a beam through the mural's 7th doorway. "What's on the other side?" Clara asked. "Home," June said, and kept painting. Final fittings went quiet and musical. Screws seating, ovens exhaling, a broom whispering across concrete, a level's bubble-finding center. Hale mounted a key rack near the front. June lettered tags that read, "Welcome home." Naomi set a basket of spare chargers below, because remembering small needs was a language of care. The camera returned once to the old day. The slammed door, the sunshot sidewalk, 3 girls holding one another upright. Then it let that image fade under the new one. Wide doors propped open, steam drifting outward, names called in greeting, hands lifting not to bar a threshold, but to wave someone through. Not because villains had suffered, but because labor had changed the workers. Evening gathered. The banner fluttered against brick, the letters crooked. Perfect. The town quietly exhaled. On the steps, Hale and Naomi stood shoulder to shoulder, dust on their sleeves, fingers threaded. Between them, Elena, Isla, and Clara laughed at a joke only children find in shadows. In the doorway behind, Evelyn wiped her palms on an apron. Charles set a chair and pressed until it steadied. Victor lowered a plank and waited, for once, to be told where it belonged. The scene didn't declare victory. It practiced it, board by board, hour by hour, with the kind of dignity that makes a town remember what open doors sound like. The day broke, bright and windless. At Homefront Haven, bunting fluttered and strings of bulbs waited for dusk. 10 doorways, freshly painted, harbor blue, sunrise gold, brick red, stood open to the courtyard, where veterans and families gathered. A simple podium faced the doors. The split coin, preserved in resin at the threshold, caught the morning light. Elena, Isla, and Clara wove between rows, handing out programs June had drawn, hands exchanging keys beneath leaves. Arturo Vega stood near Helena Cross, content to watch. Grace Holloway adjusted a tray of rolls at a table lined with stew pots. Evelyn tied an apron. Charles checked a row of chairs one last time, thumbs smoothing wood grain. Even Victor, on logistics duty, stacked folding tables without protest. Here, redemption sounded like work. At noon, Naomi stepped to the podium. The courtyard quieted. She waited a breath to honor a long silence. "We are not taking revenge," she said, steady and clear. "We are rebuilding." People cried. Others straightened. Shoulders eased. Naomi went on. She spoke of Drew without naming his death, of how he taught their daughters to check a tent's stakes before a storm, of how a town can be a tent for the soul. She thanked petition signers, donors of paint and screws, the inspector who wrote hard truths into motion, and the lawyer who translated pain into filings. Then she stepped aside. Hale lifted a wooden box. Inside, 10 keys lay on felt, each tag hand-lettered by June. He carried the first to a doorway, where a man in a pressed shirt sat in a wheelchair, his left pant leg neatly pinned. The courtyard held its breath. Hale did not hand the key down like alms. He crouched to eye level, set the key in the veteran's palm, and covered that hand with both of his, head bowed. The veteran swallowed. "You don't know what this means." "I do," Hale said. A murmur moved through the crowd. Not noise, but a current. Cameras framed hands, not faces. The second key went to a single mother who had served 2 tours and come back to a couch. The third, to a medic who still woke at sirens. With each hand-to-hand exchange, a quiet electricity built, weight passing from grief to shelter. Halfway through, June tugged her father's sleeve. "Dad," she said, breathless with pride and nerves, "say it." Hale turned toward the semicircle, his voice carrying like a steady bell. "In this house, we don't build kindness, we multiply it." Applause broke, softened, then continued like rain that doesn't want to stop. Naomi smiled through tears. Elena and Isla cheered. Clara clapped until her program folded. More keys, more hands. At the 7th door, Evelyn stood behind the welcome table, offering a roll to each recipient without fanfare. One woman paused, recognizing her. Evelyn nodded, neither asking nor refusing forgiveness. "Warm," she said, and the woman smiled and took the bread. At the 9th door, Charles set a chair he had built just inside the threshold. "Strong joinery," he muttered. The new tenant pressed the seat with her palm and laughed when it didn't wobble. He laughed too, surprised at the sound. At the 10th and final doorway, Hale lingered. The last key waited in his hand, its tag reading, Unit 10, Sunset. He looked to Naomi. She joined him, and together they offered the key to a young couple. She, a veteran. He, a new elementary teacher. Their baby reached for the tag and crinkled it, Laughter rippled outward. Arturo stepped forward, unplanned, his voice warmer than paperwork. "On behalf of those who only get to sign the orders," he said, "thank you for reminding us what they're for." He stepped back into the circle. Formalities ended. The courtyard became a festival. Music threaded the air. Someone's guitar, a child's tin whistle. People toured the rooms, admiring quilts, and a small library of field guides to jobs and benefits. On the west wall, June's mural of open doors seemed to glow. Dusk lowered like a hand. The bulbs above the eaves blinked on, one strand, then another, until the square gleamed. Grace ladled stew. Toby streamed, narrating only with breaths, and "Look at that!" Naomi found a moment on the steps, the crowd moving around her like a slow river. She closed her eyes and saw the day of the slammed door, the sun making everything crueler. She opened them to see this. Faces lifted, doors open, light enough for everyone. She touched the resin at her feet where the coin lay sealed. Evidence turned compass, wound turned marker. June handed Clara her sketchbook. Elena and Isla raced to the mural and looked back. Hale came to stand beside Naomi, shoulders touching. No speech waited in him now, only a fullness that didn't require words. A reminder that justice, at its best, wears the texture of work and the smell of bread. That power can move from the loudest room to the quietest exchange of a key between two palms. The town did not just watch, it participated, and in the participation, it healed. Naomi lifted the microphone again. "Tonight," she said, "the lights you see are not celebration. They are a promise. We will keep building until no one waits outside a door that will not open." A hush, then a swell. People turned to the lamps glowing in each window, to the shadows of new residents arranging frames, opening drawers, setting down bags they no longer had to carry. Hale glanced at June. She nodded once, as a daughter does when she's seen her father become who he is. He took Naomi's hand. Together they looked at the 10 homes, then at the warehouse yet to be converted, at the sketch taped to a column labeled Phase 2. "Ready?" Naomi asked. "Always," Hale said. The bulbs brightened as the sky deepened, and a cheer rose from the far end of the courtyard, where a child had found the light switch in Unit 5. One lamp, then 2, then the soft glow of a whole room, and another, until Homefront Haven shone like a constellation stitched by human hands. Justice, it turned out, had a pulse and a porch and a table set for more. The closing line belonged to the work itself, but Hale spoke it anyway, because some truths deserve to be said twice. "In this house," he said, "we multiply kindness." And the lights answered. "Before we say goodbye, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Are you joining us from a small town, a big city, or maybe somewhere far across the ocean? Please share in the comments. It warms my heart to see how this community comes together from every corner of the world. And if today's story touched you, I invite you to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next one. Every story we tell here is about kindness, second chances, and the quiet strength that can change a life. Thank you, truly, for spending your time with us. Your presence means more than you know. Until next time, take care of yourself, and never forget, kindness always leaves a light behind.